Thomas Whitlock had pressed Joseph Calder's shirts for 35 years, and in all that time, he had never once heard the old man raise his voice. He had never needed to. The Calder name did the raising for him, in the hush that fell over a room when a Calder ship was delayed, in the way harbor men straightened their backs when a long black car came down the pier road, in the careful, unhurried way every banker and broker in 3 counties returned a Calder's call within the hour. Marcus, the son, had inherited all of it and more besides. Where his father's power had been a kind of weather, something you simply lived under, Marcus's was colder and more exact, the kind that made grown men check their words twice before they spoke them. Thomas had watched him grow into it the way a boy grows into his father's coat, too big at first, and then, all at once, perfectly fitted and a little frightening to see. By the spring Joseph Calder turned 81, the doctors had stopped pretending. The great house at Thornhaven, which had always run on the old man's clock, early breakfasts, long afternoons in the glass house among the orchids he had grown for 40 years, the lamps lit promptly at 6, began instead to run on his illness. Nurses came and went in soft-soled shoes. The family came too, in ones and twos, the way crows come to a field before anyone is certain there's anything in it. Among the nurses, there was one Thomas noticed almost at once, though he could not at first have said why. Eleanor Finch had been hired for the overnight hours, a quiet, plainly dressed woman somewhere past 40, with steady hands and an unhurried way about her. She did not call Joseph Mr. Calder in the careful, professional voice the day nurses used, the voice people reserve for the very old and the very rich. She called him Joseph when he asked her to, and she did not flinch from his temper on the bad nights, and she did not look away from his face the way so many of the others did, as though looking too long might mean looking at their own ending too. The rest of the household, with so much else to watch that spring, hardly registered her at all. There was, after all, a great deal else. Victor Calder, Joseph's nephew, the family's long-time counsel, a narrow, careful man who had managed the Calder Trust for 20 years, had begun arriving at Thornhaven with increasing frequency, always with a leather folio under his arm, always asking in his mild and reasonable way whether Uncle Joseph had had a good morning. Everyone in the house understood well enough what he meant by it. Was the old man lucid enough, that day, to sign something? Marcus saw it. Marcus saw everything. It was, Thomas sometimes thought, the loneliest part of being him. Thomas had watched him come into the breakfast room one morning that spring, still in his traveling coat, and watched 3 cousins who had been arguing cheerfully about the value of a warehouse lease fall silent mid-sentence, the way birds go quiet when a hawk's shadow crosses a field, though Marcus had said nothing at all, had only poured his coffee and asked mildly how his father had slept. Power like that did not need raising a voice. It barely needed a voice, but Marcus said nothing yet about Victor's visits, only watched, with that stillness of his that made other men talk faster to fill the silence he left behind. It was Eleanor who first noticed how carefully Victor timed his visits. The medication came at 5. The day nurses changed shift at 6 and rarely lingered, and Victor's visits, Eleanor began to notice, had an uncanny habit of falling at 1/4 past, just when Joseph's words came slow, and his hands did not always do what he asked of them, and a signature could be guided onto a page by someone patient enough to wait for it. Eleanor began, without telling anyone, to keep her own record. Not the chart the doctors wanted, a plain notebook, the kind sold 3 for $1, in which she wrote the time and what Joseph said, and whether he seemed to know what day it was. She could not have explained, if anyone had asked her, why she did it. It seemed to her only the decent thing, to keep an honest account of a man's hours when he could no longer keep one himself. One night in April, a hard night, with rain coming sideways against the glass-house roof, Joseph asked her to open the drawer of the writing desk in the corner of his room. Inside, beneath a stack of old correspondence, was a photograph, soft at the edges from handling, a young woman in a pale coat, laughing on a stone terrace above the sea. "That's the bench," Joseph said, and for once his voice came clear and unhurried. "Right there in the picture. I asked her there. 46 years ago, and to this day I couldn't tell you what I said, only that she said yes before I'd finished saying it. Eleanor sat with him a long while that night, the photograph propped against the water glass between them, and Joseph talked, not about the company, not about the house, but about Margaret. Her laugh, her impatience with formal dinners, the way she would catch his eye across a long table and roll her eyes at some pompous guest until he had to look down at his plate to keep from laughing. The way she used to leave the garden gate unlatched on purpose, so the fox from the hedgerow could get through, because she liked to watch it from the window with her tea going cold in her hands. He talked, too, about Marcus, a small boy once, before the company had finished with him, a boy who used to run the length of the pier to meet his father's boats coming in, shouting before he was even close enough to be heard. "He doesn't run anywhere now," Joseph said quietly, and there was no self-pity in it, only a kind of tired honesty. "He walks into a room and the room goes still, and he thinks that's the same as being welcomed. I did that to him. I made him into the kind of man nobody runs toward." Near dawn, before the medication pulled him back under, Joseph's hand closed around Eleanor's with a strength that surprised her. "I want to ask for one thing," he said, "before the end. Just the one, and I need you to see that it's done, because I don't trust the rest of them to hear it the way it has to be heard." He told her what it was. Eleanor wrote it down, word for word, in the plain notebook and closed the cover, and told no one, not even Thomas, whom she liked, and who she suspected would have understood it better than most. 3 days later, Victor arrived at Thornhaven at 5:15 in the evening, as he so often did, the leather folio under his arm. By the time Thomas carried the tea tray up at 6, there was a single sheet of dense, small printed paper on the writing desk, and Joseph's signature at the bottom of it, shaky, but unmistakably his own. Victor was already gone by then, his car well down the drive. The folio, noticeably thinner than it had come. Eleanor had been in the room the whole time. No one had thought to ask the night nurse to step out. To most of the household she was simply part of the furnishings, the way a lamp or a chair is part of a room. She had watched Joseph's hand guided to the page, watched him sign something he could not have read in a hand he could barely steady, and afterward, alone, she had opened her notebook to that evening's entry, written in her own plain hand not 20 minutes before Victor arrived. Confused, asking for Margaret. Does not know what day it is, could not finish his soup. She read it twice, and then she put the notebook away in the drawer beneath her own things, where it would keep. Joseph Calder died 11 days later, on a Tuesday morning, with the family gathered in the room the way families gather at such times. Marcus at the window with his back very straight, Victor near the door with his folio. For once, left downstairs, cousins and second cousins arranged around the edges like furniture nobody quite wanted to sit in. Eleanor stood near the foot of the bed, where she had stood every night for 2 months, and where, Thomas thought afterward, she had earned more right to stand than half the people in that room. Joseph had one clear hour that morning. The doctors said it was common, in the end, a last gathering of strength, and he used every minute of it. He did not speak of the company. He did not so much as glance at Victor. He looked for a long moment at his son, and then he reached out and found Eleanor's hand without looking at it, the way a man reaches for something he has learned over many weeks to trust will be there. "This is the wish," he said, and though his voice was thin, it carried to every corner of the room. "Not the house, not the shares. I want you to Marcus to see to it that this woman is never made to feel as though she isn't in the room. That's the whole of it. I let your mother feel that way near the end, invisible in her own house, because I was too busy with everything else to look at her properly. I won't make that mistake twice, even from a bed I can't get out of." His hand tightened on Eleanor's. "She gave me your mother's face back to me one more time before I go. I'd like to think somebody might give her something back too someday. That's the wish, Marcus, the whole of it." He died a little after 10, with the rain starting up again against the glass-house roof, and for a long moment afterward no one in the room moved at all. It was Marcus who broke first, not loudly, not in any way Thomas might have imagined if he had ever allowed himself to imagine it. He simply put one hand over his face, the way a much younger man might, and Thomas, who had known him since he was a boy who ran the length of the pier, saw his shoulders go once and then again, and understood that he was watching something the household had not seen in 20 years. The codicil came apart quietly, the way these things often do on paper rather than in any room. The family's attorney, going through Joseph's papers that week, found the document Victor had filed dated to that Thursday evening, reassigning a third of the shipping trust to Victor's management. He found, too, because Alina brought it to him herself, a plain notebook with a Thursday entry that read, in full, confused, asking for Margaret. Does not know what day it is. Could not finish his soup. 2 doctors confirmed, without much difficulty, what the notebook had already said. Victor did not contest it. By the end of the month he had resigned from the family's affairs entirely, and Thornhaven did not see him again. As for Alina, her contract, like all the others, had ended with Joseph's death. Thomas found her in the glass house 3 days after the funeral, among the orchids the old man had tended for 40 years, folding the last of her things into a small case. It was Marcus, of all people, who came to find her there too. He did not say very much. He was not, Thomas reflected, a man given to saying much. He told her what his father had said, in case grief had carried it past her in the moment, and then he asked, a little awkwardly, the way a man asks something he has never before had occasion to ask, whether she might stay on at Thornhaven a while longer. Not as staff, he said. There were things of his father's that wanted sorting, the desk, the letters, the photographs in the drawer, and he found, he admitted, that he did not particularly want to do it alone, and could not think of anyone else his father would have trusted with it. Alina looked at him for a long moment. Then she set the case down and said that she thought she could manage that. Thomas, watching from the doorway with the tea tray he had carried up out of long habit more than any real purpose, found his hands were not quite steady. He had pressed this family's shirts for 35 years. He had never once, in all that time, seen anyone walk into that glass house and come out lighter than they had gone in, until that gray afternoon, when he watched the coldest man he had ever known cross the floor toward the one person in the house who had never once looked away from his father's face, and reached down to help her carry the case. It was, Thomas thought, exactly the sort of thing Joseph would have wanted to see. He only wished, watching it, that the old man could have been there to see it for himself.